Hello, hello. Thank you for coming and spending some time with me. My name is Jennifer and this is Jen the Bookworm. And if this is your first time here, I hope you will find this interesting. If not, if you've been here before, then I really appreciate you for coming back. And this kind of video might interest you a bit more. So this is my very first attempt at doing a stats video. I know that there's a couple of booktubers that really look forward to putting out a collection of statistics about their reading year, and I thought that would be a lot of fun as well. One of the things that I decided kind of early on in BookTube is I didn't really like Goodreads. It was just not very, I don't know, my bookshelves did not seem to be intuitive. It was difficult for me to navigate. It was just, I know thousands of people, tens of thousands of people maybe even, are navigating it without trouble, but it just didn't speak to me. So I don't really use Goodreads and decided instead to use Storygraph. And I will link, or I'll put a link to Storygraph in the description below for anybody who's interested. But Storygraph is somewhat like Goodreads in that it gives you an opportunity to track what you're reading, but it also produces for you a nice bit of stat block at the end of the year. Actually, it does it it updates as you're going. So I was able to pull some graphs and stuff regarding my reading year last year using Storygraph. So that's where I'm getting a lot of the data that I'm pulling from. And I'd love a chance to go over with you what I did last year. So the first graph that I have for you is we're dealing with the mood of my reading for last year. As you can see, most of my reading, a big chunk of it, has been books that have been considered to be adventurous. When I clicked on the graph, some of the examples that they put for adventurous was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, which was a reread for me prior to starting BookTube. Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Blood Rights by Jim Butcher, one of the Dresden Files books. Soulsmith by Will Wright, one of the books in the Cradle series, which I'm really currently enjoying. And The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan is Percy Jackson's first book. When I clicked on Mysterious, some of the examples of books that it showed was Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon Maguire. Lovely book. I really enjoyed that. City of the Lost by Kelly Armstrong, which is a book that I had purchased prior to BookTube and decided to give it a read because I needed something to fill out my TBR one month, and was really surprisingly drawn in by it and really had a good time reading that. Another one, Northern Lights by Nora Roberts. It was my first Nora Roberts book and also surprisingly compelling. And then obviously you can see that a big chunk of my books were considered dark mood, such as Hellmouth by Giles Christian, which was a short story, but it's a medieval horror, and it was really good. The only complaint I had about that book is that it needed to be bigger. It just needed to be book-sized. It was a small short story, but it needed to be more, because I got drawn into the world, but there was not a lot. Only so much you can do in a few pages. Another one was The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. My first Karen Slaughter book. Really enjoyed it, and I hope to read more of her. It by Stephen King. Yes, very dark in many places. The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. Very moody, very dark. And Fantastic Land by Mike Bachov, and that is definitely psychologically takes you to a dark place. So yes, But those are the kinds of books that I gravitated to this year, as you can see. So I have this graph here that says page numbers, and I'm going to take this with a grain of salt because I've noticed that different books have, like different editions, have different page numbers attached to them. And many of the books that I read, some of them I read that were Kindle books, but many of them were audiobooks. And so pages read, it may not be entirely accurate. It depends really on what book that they use for the stat. And I wasn't able to figure out how to, there's a place, and I didn't grab this graph because it wouldn't make sense to, but there was a place that where it said, this is how many of the books you read ebook, this is how many you accessed audiobook, and this is how many you accessed that was, a physical book. And it said most of my books were physical books, but I didn't see a place where I could mark that. I guess I'll have to research that further and figure out how I can change that, so that way it'll be accurate for next year. But this says that page numbers, the amount of books that I read, 45% of the books were between 300 and 499 pages. So mid-sized, good-sized, meaty books. 30% of what I read was less than 300 pages. And that makes sense because I did read the Shannon McGuire books that I read. They were all pretty short books. And then over October, I read a lot of horror short stories. So it makes sense that a good portion of what I read were smaller books. And about 25% of the books that I read were over 500 pages. Which this was the year that I was really introduced to Brandon Sanderson, so that makes a lot of sense too. Also Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King and a lot of Brandon Sanderson this year, so both of those gentlemen write big meaty books, so makes sense. As you can see from this graph here, 95% of what I read was fiction, and a very small 5% was nonfiction. I only read 3 nonfictions this year. I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. A story about a woman who is kind of recounting the abuse that her mom dealt her as she was grooming her to be a child actor. The second one was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. I read that book. That was the first book I read in this year. And I picked it up and I wasn't sure. I just had heard good things about it, but I wasn't sure what I was getting into. But it was actually quite a good book. It was quite opposite of what I was expecting. And I'm glad for it. It was a really good book. And the third one was Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. It was just a bio of her and her career up to this point. I found it entertaining and fun, and it was a quick little read. But most of what I read this year was fiction. And that's probably going to be true next year too. It's probably always going to be true. I mean, I do like to read nonfiction stuff, and I do have some nonfiction stuff lined up. But the majority of what I read is probably always going to be fiction. So, of the genres that I read this year, 34 books of what I read was considered fantasy. And I should say, overall, I read 57 books. So, I read 57 books in 2022. Very happy with that number. So, but of that number, 34 is considered fantasy, 14 was considered horror. There are some overlap here. These numbers are not going to add up to 57 because some things are considered different, or considered 2 categories at the same time. 13 was considered young adult, and 11 was considered mystery. I didn't think I read much in the way of mystery, so I'm not in control of what these books are considered. When I look up the book on Storygraph, it tells me it falls under these categories. So some of these books were also considered a mystery. I don't know that I consider most of what I read to be a mystery, but that is the way it was categorized. So in 2022, my most read author was, who's surprised? Brandon Sanderson. Nobody's surprised. I've been struggling since I started this channel for this channel not to become the Brandon Sanderson channel, but I'm just getting started and he's so good. And I just reading a lot of his stuff and having read 3 of his Stormlight Archive books. I read the first Mistborn Era 1 book, and his entire Reckoners series prior to starting BookTube. I've read a lot of Brandon Sanderson this year. So it was actually reading some of Steelheart, and I read Mitosis and Calamity. There's the Fire, something I can't remember, and Lux. Those books were the books that kind of got me started on searching, on finding things out about Brandon Sanderson, and finding Brandon Sanderson led me to find BookTube, and finding BookTube led me here. So I'm very grateful actually for that. But yeah, I read the most of him, followed by Suzanne Collins, because prior to BookTube, I also read the Hunger Games series and the newest Suzanne Collins book, something A Songbird and Snakes, Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, which is a prequel to Hunger Games, which follows Cornelius Snow, who is President Snow in the Hunger Games books, and he is somebody who trains or kind of guides one of the tributes through the 10th Hunger Games. So when the Hunger Games was still fairly new, and the concept of the capital was still very new, and rebellion was not that far a distance in the past as it is with Katniss and such. So it was a very interesting book. But those 4 Suzanne Collins books put her my second most read, although she is tied with Jem Butcher, because I read a few Dresden File books this year. Stephen King, 3 of his books, which if you know me outside of BookTube, you would know that's amazing, because I had sort of sworn off Stephen King for a while. And Will White, who I'd never heard of until a few months ago. And I read 3 of his books this year. So that's my lineup for most read author. And it's interesting to me because my favorite authors prior to BookTube were Kim Harrison, Kelly Armstrong was one, John Saul. These are all way bottom of the list now. And I suppose that is to be expected as I'm being inundated with more recommendations, and watching BookTube, I'm going through and going, oh, I gotta put that on my list, I gotta put that on my list, that sounds like a good one, I gotta, and I'm wanting to read what's current, and I want to read what other people are reading, because I really find that I enjoy buddy reads, and I enjoy read-alongs and such. So I have been exploring new authors and stuff like I haven't been in a long time. So I guess it's to be expected. Some of my old favorites are now at the bottom. So this graph shows books versus pages. So there are some months when I read only 3 books, but the page count of those books were much bigger. It shows that I actually did read a lot that month, even though it was just 3 books. But one of those books was probably a Stormlight Archive book. And then like in October, I read a lot of books, but I didn't read a lot of big books. So the page count kind of reflects that, yeah, I read a lot of books, but I didn't read as many pages as maybe other months where I read fewer books. So some fun stats that I collected from Storygraph. First book versus last book of 2022. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson was the first book I read this year. And this says Soulsmith was the last book I read this year, but that's not true. I don't know why it didn't show up. And I think they compiled my end of year report before I got this in, but actually my last book of the year was Black Flame by Will White. I got it finished with minutes to spare before the clock ticked over and 2023 was upon us. So that's what I actually finished last. The longest versus the shortest book. My longest book was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. And the shortest book was Hellmouth by Giles Christian. It was only 52 pages long. That's not very long. Least time spent versus most time spent. Unsouled only took me 1 day. Unsouled by Will White. But then I think I took 2 days with Soul Smith, and I think I only took 1 day with Black Flame as well. But Unsouled is the one that they chose. And A Royal Guide to Monster Slaying by Kelly Armstrong took 11 days. It's not because it was a bad book, it wasn't. But it was a middle grade book. I'm not the target demographic for middle grade, but because it was Kelly Armstrong, I really wanted to check it out. I was thinking it might be a good book that my daughter might like, and she very well might. I don't think I'm going to continue on in the series, not because it was bad. I would probably give it around 3 stars if I haven't rated it already once before. But it was just I'm not the target demographic for. But the reason why it took me so long to read it, aside from those things, is because I was reading it in November and I decided to do my read it or delete it challenge. And so I was reading this off my Kindle and I realized I actually also need to have an audiobook. Not I need to have this book as an audiobook, but when I'm doing my chores or moving around the house or doing whatever, I like to have an audiobook to listen to. So I chose The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now, a lot of readers read multiple books at the same time, but I have a hard time doing that. Not because I'm worried that I'm going to mix up the books. It's more that I get tunnel visioned. I get a book and I start reading it and I start really loving it. And then I want to do nothing else but read that book. And that's what happened with The Green Mile. I started reading that book and I tried to read the other book, but when given the choice to read a middle grade book by Kelly Armstrong or The Green Mile by Stephen King, I was much more compelled to read Stephen King until it was finished, and then I sat down and finished up the other book as well. But it's not because the Kelly Armstrong book was a bad book, it's just Stephen King called to me. This is my first year on YouTube, on BookTube, so I haven't quite as carefully kept track of 2021, but I do have some things to compare to. It won't be a very thorough comparison, and I'm hoping by next year I'll be able to have a much more thorough comparison. But in 2021, by my best estimate, I read 27 books. This was without focus. Of course, there was no reason or even knowledge of how to make a TBR or anything like that. There was no need for a TBR. This was me meandering through, reading whatever I felt in the mood to read. I don't think I would have done that many books except for my sister and I my sister really enjoyed reading Sherilyn Kenyon's Dark Hunter, Dream Hunter book series years ago. And she wanted someone to talk to about the book. So she talked me into reading the books with her. So I read like 14 of those 27 books were those books, so that we could talk about the books and stuff like that. And then I read a book on classical Egyptian mythology because I was writing a book that was very heavily Egyptian flavored. I read like 6 nonfiction books and a couple other books where I was finishing Kim Harrison's The Hollows series. So that's what I read last year, 27 books. And in 2022, as I said before, I read 57 books. 19 of those books were pre-BookTube, but 38 books were post-BookTube books, which I think is pretty amazing. I read more from July, because I started in July. My first video went out June 30th. So I started BookTube, I started reading for BookTube in July. And from July to the end of December, I read more books than I did all of 2021. And of course, all of the first half of 2022. So I find that to be amazing. And I'm hoping that next year, being part of BookTube from January 1st to December 31st, that my number will, I think I said in a previous video that I have a goal of 100 books. I'm hoping to read 100 books. If I get there, great. And if I don't, that's fine. It's not like, my family will not have honor anymore if I don't read it. It's not so dire, but that's what I'm hoping to get to. But I'm encouraged by these numbers because 38 books and I was sort of just getting started. And I feel like I'm starting to read a little faster now that I've been practicing more often. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what the next year brings and how I can compare that to 2022 next year. So I'd love to bring you some stats on a breakdown of my reviews and how many of my books were 4-star books and 5-star books and so on and so forth. But on Storygraph, I didn't rate any of them. I have been leaving reviews on Audible when I finish out a month. But I haven't been reviewing anywhere else. I had ideas of doing reviews on like Goodreads and stuff, but I hadn't done it. This year I'm going to at least try to star them, so that way I have this data for next year. I can say that The Green Mile by Stephen King was the only 5-star read since starting BookTube. So that's the only 5-star I've given. Now, my favorite author as I stand right now is Brandon Sanderson. And I have my favorite book as it stands right now is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. But I still only gave it a 4-star. So the Green Mile was just far and away blew me away. And that's the only 5-star I've given so far. Most of what I gave fell within 3 and 4 stars. I don't think I ever gave a 2-star. I gave 2 1-stars this year, except for The Children by John Saul. It was just not a great book. It was about a family curse where the father has to abuse his daughter, and why, what. It was not well done. It was not a good story. It did not make a lot of sense. And it was so disappointing because John Saul was my favorite horror author. And I loved him. I still love him. I still love every other book of his I've ever read was a good book. This book just sucked a lot. So 1 star. And The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I know is a controversial take, but I didn't enjoy it. I do plan to give her another shot. I might have to wait until October or whenever I'm doing spooky stories again. But I didn't enjoy the way that the story was told. I didn't enjoy the main character, and so perhaps it's the main character. I can't decide whether or not it's the writing or the main character, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's the writing, and that's going to disappoint some people. But, that's the way it is. Not everyone's going to like everything. And she is widely known as a fantastic writer. So it just doesn't land for me, though. At least that book didn't land for me, and we'll see. Because I own one more of her books that I will one day give a shot to, and we'll see how I feel about that one. I am sort of dragging my feet on doing so, though, because I just so didn't enjoy the other one. So while I was at it, I decided to pull up a couple of channel stats just to see um, what milestones I might have hit this time around. 64 subscribers is what I ended the year with. Only about 20 of those are friends and family, so I feel that feels pretty good to me that there are that many people out there that care what I want to read and what I thought about it. And so I'm pretty happy with that number. I do hope to get the number higher as I hope to grow the channel. Again, the subs, that's a number that doesn't necessarily matter. I could still do this and probably be pretty happy, staying at around 50 people or whatnot that are not family that care about what I read and stuff like that. But it is still fun to watch things grow, and I still want to do the best that I can do. So I'm hoping to bring that number up some. So this year I participated in 3 read-alongs. I did Fairy Tale by Stephen King, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and It by Stephen King. Those 3 books I read along with a couple of my friends on, mostly I do my read-alongs with people on the Grimoire Discord, and I really enjoyed those experiences, getting to talk to other people about what I'm reading, having them be reading the same thing, and we discuss throughout. That was a lot of fun. Right now I'm currently doing a Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin as a read-along, so I'm enjoying that. And I hope to do more in the coming year. I didn't really do any one-on-one buddy reads. Most of the things that were going to be buddy reads turned into a read-along with a bunch of other people. So I didn't do any like one-on-ones necessarily, but I still had fun doing the read-alongs that I did. So my favorite challenges that I've done this year, I've really only done one challenge this year, and I'm hoping to give myself a couple more challenges to do throughout the year. But the one that I did do was the Read It or Delete It challenge, which is going to be an ongoing challenge. I'll keep it going in 2023 and try to get through more of those books that are on my Kindle. But basically the books, the premise behind this challenge was I had a lot of books that I had downloaded kind of willy-nilly, just discount Kindle books. I get a notice saying this book is on sale for $1.99 or whatever, and I download it because it sounded worth $1.99, I guess. But now my Kindle is just clogged with that stuff, and I was able to pull out 640 something books and write them all on a slip of paper and put them in a bowl, or really one of my salad bowls, really big bowl, so that I could choose from there at random a book that I pull up from my Kindle and I start reading it, and if I like it, then yay, I've read another book. And there were a couple of books this last year that that were good that I picked up that way, or I delete it. If I don't like it, I delete it, get rid of it. I don't need it on my Kindle. I don't need it taking up space, and I don't need it taking up time. So read it or delete it. And I did that mostly in November, and I plan to do more throughout this year. My top video for this year, according to YouTube, was my BookTube newbie tag, which that's kind of fun. My very first video, it probably blows. I mean, I've gotten so much more comfortable in front of the camera, and I have background now and whatever, but I was so nervous and stiff. But 92 views on that video, so that's pretty awesome. Another one that is pretty high up there with 86 views. It's my favorite video that I've done, and it's bananas to me because this is the kind of video that I wanted to do when starting BookTube, and it was my spoiler review of Stephen King's Fairy Tale. Now, I didn't specifically want to do that book or whatnot, but the whole point for me of starting a BookTube, well, there's a couple of points. Making friends and stuff that are in the reading community, yes. But another one was just to be able to sit down and say, here's my feelings, let me tell them all to you, blah. And then, just be able to talk and discuss and not see the other person's eyes glaze over as I did it. So, And this video was an hour long, and I had no illusions that anyone would watch it. I mean, it's an hour long, and I'm not a well-known YouTuber, and I got a couple, my friends and family, they subscribe to my channel, but they don't all watch it. So, just that 86 random people would view that video and care what I have to say for an hour. Whether they watch the whole thing or not doesn't matter. It just, that blew me away. I really love that because that was my favorite video. My lowest viewed videos, well, the book to screen for The Green Mile. I have a book to screen series where I discuss the adaptations and how it holds up to the book. And I did The Green Mile, and it only got 10 views. But I did that towards the end of the year, and honestly, a lot of my December stuff was amongst the lowest viewed. If any of you are like me, you might be going back and watching some of the December stuff now because you just didn't have time to do it in December. And fair enough. And even if nobody ever goes back and watches those things, it's fine. It's there. Someone one day is going to read The Green Mile and be like, I wonder what people on the internet are saying about it. They might come across my video and it'll be fine. But a lot of my lower rated videos were December videos, but everyone's really busy in December. So in this year, I did 38 videos and 1 short. I intended to do more shorts, and I don't really know why I don't do it. Feels like it would be super easy to keep those up, to do those, but then I always feel like I've got to edit, and editing is a pain, takes some time. But really on a 1-minute video, it shouldn't really take all that much time. So I don't know. I intend to do more shorts this coming year, so that'll be a goal of mine. I did 7 tag videos. Seems like I did more. I like tag videos and I had fun doing them. So it feels like I did more, but I guess in 6 months doing 7 tag videos, that's, a little more than one a month, but I had fun doing those, and I invite anyone to tag me to anything. If I can do it, I'll do it. I enjoy those. I only had a handful of reviews. I really envisioned this channel to be more review heavy. I am finding what other booktubers are saying is true about reviews don't get a lot of views, but I'm not really in it for the views as much as excited as I get when people want to watch my stuff. That's not really the main motivation. So I plan on reviewing more of the books, but another thing that kind of feels like it gets in the way of me doing a review is I am catching up. I am playing catch up to a lot of people within the circle of BookTube that I am involved in. I feel like doing a review on a book that most everyone else seems to have read already feels redundant, but I do still hope to do a few more reviews than I did this year. I didn't do a lot of list videos, and that is something I'm going to try and do more of. They seem to be quite popular, but being a new reader, no, I'm not a new reader. I've been reading since I was little, but being new to reading in this way, being new to reading with such focus on reading and attaining reading goals and such. Previous to this, I did a lot of rereading, so I didn't expose myself to a lot of new authors and such. So I'm getting quite an education with what's out there, but because I'm still new at that, I didn't always feel like I had a lot to contribute to, 10 greatest books that do this trope and whatever, 5 of my favorite, whatever. But I did do one top 5 favorite list videos, and I hope to do more of those in the future. Most of my videos were TBRs, mid-month check-ins and wrap-ups. So that's the bulk of what I did this year, and I will continue to do those kind of videos. I just hope to do a few more of the other kind of videos as well. This year I DNF'd one book. It was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, but I do think that I DNF'd it for a dumb reason. Honestly, I DNF'd it because it wasn't Dresden Files, and I was really into Dresden Files, and I just needed to read Dresden Files. So I DNF'd the book. It wasn't for me. And then after a while, I started thinking maybe it wasn't for me. I did find the narration to be I didn't like it as well. So I think that I'm going to try the book again, but I'm going to try it in reading an ebook. So that way the narration choices don't become a problem, a barrier to me finishing the book. And we'll see if I get that read. I'm not in a big hurry, but one day I hope to read it. And I only did one really big book haul video, and I did one like mini book haul video as attached to a different video. So not a whole lot of hauls this year. That's probably going to stay true. I do have I just bought a bunch of books because in the last couple of months, Audibles can't seem to help themselves but to have a sale and steal all my money. So, and then, towards the end of the year, Christmas sales and stuff like that on Amazon, I got a lot of Kindle sales as well. So, so I do have a book haul that I could compile, but because most of the books that I get are audio and digital, I don't have stacks of books to show anybody, but I still might do up a video showing the things that I've recently obtained. And that was it. That was my stats for 2022. So what'd you think? How'd I do? I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to leave me comments. How many books did you read this year? And did you have a good reading year? I felt like I had a great reading year. Most of the books that I read were 3-star and above, and most of the books I think fell into the 4-star area. So a bunch of 4-star books. I hope next year, or this year, 2023, is just as good, if not better, because I enjoyed my reading experience quite a lot. Please leave me a comment about what your reading experience was like. And if you liked this content, leave me a like, leave me a sub if you haven't subscribed to this channel. It's free and easy to do. Really helps out my channel a lot and lets me know that you like this kind of content. I have noticed quite a few of the people who view my content are not yet subscribed. I invite you to do so. And thank you very much for coming and spending this time with me, even if it is just to go through and go through a bunch of stats about what I did in the last year. One of my friends said something about you booktubers or something else. And I'm like, yes, we have found a way to take a nerdy hobby and make it nerdier by adding stats to it. So, but it's something that I enjoy, and it's something that a lot of the booktubers out there I've seen has enjoyed, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I hope with that you had a great rest of your day.